Good afternoon, people, and welcome to the Rangers Review afternoon briefing, you could say, as we react to the AGM this morning. I'm Derek Clark, and I'm joined by a full squad today. It's great to have Joshua Barrie on. First of all, how are we doing, Joshua? I can see some Christmas decorations behind you.
Yeah, the tree, which is taller than it looks, five and a half feet. Put it up last night, so yeah, feeling Christmassy. But no, good. Obviously, plenty to discuss. Just back from the AGM, and a lot of topics covered, a lot of topics not covered that people wanted covered. So yeah, lots to talk about, Derek.
Yeah, we'll get our teeth stuck into it shortly. Stevie Clifford also joins us. You were there as well, Stevie. Good to have you on. A lot of talking points, as Joshua mentioned there.
Mate, see, before we go, why is there no star on that tree, Joshua? What's happening there? Like,
good point.
There's nothing there. It's like
we actually went to get a star last night, and we went to Dobby's, and my better half didn't like any of them. She wanted a specific one. I think she wanted it to be gold, and there was no gold star, so we're gonna have to go back.
I've well seen that you've just listened to Ross Wilson speak for an hour and deflect every question that went at you because you've just done the exact same, blaming your missus.
Yeah, which is true, but aside from that, it's well decorated, good colours on it, nice lights. So I'll have a star. Next time I'm on, I'll have a star. You can hold me to it.
I expect a picture of Michael Beale. Derek, it was a very interesting AGM. A couple of good points on that have kind of resonated and stuck with me, but it covered quite a bit. As Joshua said, there was a few things that I thought would come up that weren't mentioned, but it was certainly a worthwhile morning. That's for sure.
Yeah, before we talk about the AGM, this is the most pressing issue, Stevie. James Snedden gets in touch. Has Stevie been hitting the sunbeds? Have you been seeking a sun shower?
Don't deflect, Stevie. Don't deflect.
No, I don't sunbathe. Like, obviously, mate, listen, look at me. Like, you can't do anything with this. Like, you can't make this better. So there's no sunbeds or anything for me.
You're just glowing.
It might just be the way the light's reflecting in or something, but no, I am peely white and Wally is normal.
Geza A says Joshua is a star. So there we go, Joshua. Stick yourself in the top of your tree. Right. Now, let's talk football and Rangers because that's why people are tuning in. You guys were at the AGM, lots to discuss. Joshua, it was well attended by all accounts. There's a thread Joshua was there for us. It did a little Twitter thread. Folks, go and check it out. All the big points are on there. Joshua, what was the main takeaways for you?
Yeah, well, you're right, Derek. I think Stuart Robertson said it was the busiest AGM he'd seen since he'd been at the club. One of these things where it's built up so much and you're speaking to people in the foyer beforehand and you say, what do you think it's going to be like? And ultimately, I think these types of events, because there's obviously only a set amount of time, I think it was just over an hour and a half, Stevie, that they were on for. There was a good chunk of questions, but obviously not everyone gets to ask a question because I think you'd be there all day. I thought the atmosphere, it was going to be telling at the start, the type of reaction that the board got. To my eyes, there was a bit of an air of what am I trying to say there?
Trepidation.
Thank you, trepidation. There was kind of muted applause throughout, and because obviously financially, I guess the club can show positive developments from last year, but the reality is this is a football conversation. It's a football podcast. Rangers are a football club, and when people have been dissatisfied with the product that's on show and raising a number of concerns such as the value of the squad, where is the value of the squad at the moment, the injury list, things off the park as well, then there is always going to be an element of a frosty atmosphere. There was an update on the disabled facilities, which is something that's come up in quite a lot of previous AGMs. Lots of questions to put to Ross Wilson in the question and answer session about contract situations, the player trading model. He was asked a number of questions regarding that. Just trying to see what else. Douglas Park asked a couple of questions by representatives of Club 1872. He also interestingly weighed in on the Kent and Morelos contract debate, and he didn't speak much, Douglas Park, so I thought that was quite interesting that he chose that moment to discussions about loans. Michael Beale had a little Q&A as well. So a lot of things covered, Derek. Looking at Twitter after, there was things not covered that people wanted to be covered as well. But yeah, plenty of topics for us to kind of discuss over the next wee while.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the big thing for you, Stevie, that stood out from the AGM this morning?
There was 2 big points. I think for us watching, and people like kind of wanting the football side of it, I think the biggest thing that I took away from today, and Joshua and I immediately looked at each other when it was said, was when it was talking about the player contracts, and the question was at Ross Wilson saying, basically, are you happy? You said a couple of years ago at the AGM you were kind of content with the way the situation was at the club with the contracts. They asked him directly on Alfredo and Ryan Kent's contract situation, and was he still in that and happy with how it was going. He basically gave a reply of, it takes a lot of factors, the players, the contract, agents, wives, etc. He basically tried to explain it and said that the club are still hopeful. Out of nowhere, as something Joshua alluded to, Douglas Park kind of spoke without being prompted and basically said, and Joshua will be able to confirm this as well, he said that sometimes when you negotiate and then you try and settle and get a result of a contract negotiation, the other party simply wants too much money and you can't go anywhere. And that was it. It was a very brief description, and it more or less told me that Ryan Kent and Alfredo Morelos want too much money. He didn't come out and say that, but that's certainly what we all took in the room from it. Joshua and I spoke about it immediately. It was a very impromptu comment. It wasn't asked upon him. He didn't get invited to speak. He basically just said, we've got a wage platform, and if sometimes people just want too much money. Everybody in that room, there was a noticeable, I wouldn't say gasp, but there was a noticeable response to it. So that was from a footballing point of view, that was a big takeaway from today. Above Michael Beale and above the situation was Douglas Park's reaction to that. So that's the big thing, footballing wise. He also, Douglas Park again, he was prompted by Club 1872 to kind of answer and give a 5-year plan. And he was very brief. He basically just said the 5-year plan is to get this football club winning as much as possible and as many trophies as possible. Then he went on to say, interestingly again, unprompted, he went on to say that he really wants the dispute with Club 1872 resolved. He would like that immediately sorted. He doesn't set out to fall out with anyone. We're all fans together, but they must sign an NDA. Now, that is very interesting for me, those 2 points, because these are things that we've spoken about a lot as a fan base. So they were the big things that I took away from today. A lot of the questions were run-of-the-mill, a lot of kind of pointed ones. I'm sure Joshua maybe agree at Ross Wilson, which speaks a wee bit for where the fan base is at the moment in terms of confidence surrounding him and players coming in. So those were the big points of the day. The financial stuff we obviously know about. The points regarding the disabled access was very interesting. That's probably something, Derek, to go over after this bit, because there's bits about seating being coming out and then building on and stuff. But if we're wanting to properly focus on that would maybe be a good idea to come back to that bit, I think.
Yeah, I do plan to. The point Stevie was making there with regards to Douglas Park, talking about Kent and Morelos, Joshua, was an interesting one. Ross Wilson was quizzed on that. The question was put to him. You said you're comfortable with the contracts, or Alfredo and Ryan. Why have we allowed them to run down their contracts? He responded, it's not a case of allowing it. There is a willingness from the club and manager for those players to stay with us, and time will tell if that happens. Why didn't they go in the summer? We've rejected one offer for both players on the basis that players were of more value, and we went on to be league champions that same season. We've rejected one offer for each of the 2 players as their value to us was worth more than what was offered. He touched on that, and the interesting point from the chairman, Douglas Park, on the comments that he made, suggesting that maybe the players are just seeking future elsewhere, and that's a point. That's not a case of offering players contracts and name signing. There's a lot of factors you need to consider, family and what have you. They have been in Scotland for some time, but from the comments that you heard at the AGM. How confident are you that those two players are going to sign new deals?
Probably not that confident. You can dress these contract situations up, I think, in a lot of different ways. You can use Connor Goldson as a positive example. I don't think you want to make a habit of that because it limits your ability to, I think, plan for the future. Yes, Connor Goldson did sign on last summer, but had he chose not to, Rangers, I think, would have been obviously in a more kind of difficult situation and are kind of at the mercy of waiting until a player's made their mind up. Now, of course, that is par for the course, I guess, in football. Players have more power. They're represented by agents who know what they're doing. It's not like it was, I guess, even 10, 15 years ago with contracts. And Ross Wilson did say that effectively that they've only had one offer for either player, which was rejected in the title-winning season. But that was a long time ago. And since that point, you're talking, say, those offers 2 years ago or whatever, the players haven't either been moved on or signed new contracts. So while someone like Morelos, you would look at him if he was to go in the summer and say for the for what he gave, £1 million, etc., etc. Another question was put to Ross Wilson about the evaluation Dave King made of the squad in 2019. Now, Wilson, I think, fairly said that there wasn't science behind King's squad assessment. I think Wilson, with his background, would know more about the valuation of players. Probably, I think it's fair to say that. What I think you can say is until Beale comes in and the board will hope develops these players, someone like Kamara, and gets them back to somewhere near in their potential. And Beale said this at his first press conference last Thursday. He said one or two players are not at the valuation they were 6 or 8 months ago, which harms the club and effectively harms everyone involved unless, I guess, the player gets what they want. And that's completely true. So at the moment, Rangers are not in a position where, yes, they can show, okay, next year we'll have the Barrie and Aribo money in the accounts. They've had Pattis and they've broken the player trade, the record fee however many times twice in the last year. But going forward from this position, where are the sellable assets? And that's why the Kent and Morelos situation, although you can say that Douglas Park, what he's effectively saying is you can't be completely at the mercy of players, which is true. But also if the club puts so much emphasis on the player trading model, then I think criticism is going to follow when players like Kent and Morelos are in this situation, if that makes sense. Hopefully that point made somewhat of a sense. But for as much as it was, I think, fair what Douglas Park was saying, I also think the Rangers are in this situation. It's not a situation they'd want to be in with Kent and Morelos, and I don't think you can kind of dress it up in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, at this point here, Stevie, James Perry says, did anyone ask why the player trading model is not working? I know that Stuart Robertson issued a defence of Ross Wilson, but in terms of the trading model, was that a question that was posed to the board at all?
Yeah, it was. There was quite a long question asking basically about player trading and why, Joshua will keep me right on this, and why basically the percentage of players that we bought in of the 7 out with Cholak, I think only 6 full games out of the 27 had been played, and was recruitment good enough? And is the player trading model basically working? And that was then turned into, did the board have backing in Ross Wilson, which at this point, Derek, you could tell the room there was obviously some support for the questions towards Ross Wilson and people feeling that it wasn't being good enough. Stuart Robertson pretty quickly and pretty defiantly gave a unanimous backing to Ross Wilson and said that in the 3 years that he's been here, the playing squad has dramatically improved and our situation had dramatically improved since then. Ross Wilson went on to give a pretty fairly robust defence of himself, which he's entitled to do. He said that Ross Wilson doesn't sign players. We sign them as a department, and that he, as a club, they were aware of the situation with John Souttar, as an example he used. And because that was one of the criticisms, Derek, that was given to him, who signed off on that deal, being a man that had missed, I think, 40% of games or something he mentioned for Hearts. So he basically said that they're hopeful and comfortable that they can get to the bottom of the John Souttar situation injury-wise and they can fix that. He also went on to say that a lot of the valuations that the gentleman was asking him about, namely Juninho Bacuna, who he'd said cost £2 million, was completely false. Juninho Bacuna was a free transfer, didn't cost Rangers anything, and indeed we made money off him. There was a suggestion that Aaron Ramsey it cost us upwards of £3 million to get him completely rubbished again, said that the valuations were nowhere near true. So he was pretty, I think Joshua would agree with this. I think that Ross Wilson was pretty robust in his defence of himself naturally, but I think he was also trying to say, he took the questions on board and he didn't hide away from them, but I think he was trying to say that it's not as clear cut as it's painted.
Yeah.
He doesn't it's not him doing all the work. It's not him signing the players. It's a collective. No player will come in that he doesn't have the final say on, kind of thing. And so with regards to trading, the player trading model was definitely covered, but it was a robust defence of it instead of there being he understood that while we're second, it's never good enough and it's going to be critical. And he does also appreciate that he needs to get more out of the players that came in. But the question was definitely raised and asked.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Stevie. Wilson isn't sitting on Y-Scout just signing players every day of the week at the training centre. He oversees the football department. I guess we only get an idea of exactly what his job entails day to day through things like this, because he's not someone that will do lots of media appearances. But the Bacuna thing's a good example. And it follows on from similar messages over the last few weeks about the manager having the final say regarding recruitment. Now, we know under Steven Gerrard, and Wilson said this today, Bacuna was a player that the previous coaching staff wanted. He was free, so he was brought into the club. When there was a question about why was there no Dutch players signed, Wilson said that Van Bronckhorst brought one Dutch player that he wanted to sign. They agreed personal terms with him, and he went in and signed for someone else.
Yeah,
Ross Wilson now using his name in the third person, which I'm never a fan of, but he said Ross Wilson does not sign players. Again, that isn't, according to him and according to other stuff we know, it is not just him drawing up a list. He heads up the scouting department, and I guess certain managers like Gerrard might have had more influence if he wanted certain players, someone like John Lundstrom, for example. There would have been more of an emphasis placed on getting that player, whereas Van Bronckhorst was perhaps someone that was more comfortable working under the direct sporting director model. And to go back to one of his final press conferences, I think the line he said is, "There's no geo list. There's just a Rangers list." So I think criticism of the football department is justified because, again, of the contract situation and the fact that Rangers, of where they are, something that me and Stevie were talking about at the AGM is, you can plan 5 years ahead. Douglas Parks asked about his 5-year plan. You can plan 5 years ahead as long as you win the next game. That was, I think it was a Bayer Leverkusen sporting director said that in an interview I was reading with him in The Athletic. And that's perhaps part of the situation that you reach with the AGM today, and when performances haven't been good at all. But yeah, Wilson was able to add some context to his role, what it entails, and that was interesting to hear. But he was, I think, the one on the stage who definitely got the most, probably the most criticism from the Q&A time.
Yeah, Derek Clark very much appreciated that response, Joshua. So yeah, big fan of that. Like the dog coming in there, Stevie, was he a fan of the AGM as well?
Oh, I told you last week when I was trying to do this show that as soon as I start speaking, she'll jump up, want attention and stuff like that. So she's now sitting at my feet with a ball, wanting attention. But yeah, I mean, I do think, overall today, I would agree with Joshua. I think Ross Wilson probably got it the most tight. There was the most questions asked of him, and they were probably the most pointed questions. I would say that's fair, Joshua, in terms of his performance and his recruitment. It goes back to something I said last week. One of the big questions I put to Michael Beale in our time with him after his unveiling was, are you going to get the final say? Are you going to be allowed to bring in your own players? And if you remember, we discussed that as well on the show, that it was quite an extensive answer in terms of they were all adamant that it's Michael Beale's show and Ross Wilson does not sign players. He does not get the final say and nothing's kind of pushed on. But interestingly as well, in that, Michael Beale did say that he was well aware of the players that have came in and their players that they've tracked previously as well. So there's a lot of kind of interesting things that perhaps recruitment is maybe not as straightforward as we think. Perhaps even criticisms of Ross Wilson um, aren't viable or aren't fair. But what I would say in return to that is the exact same thing that I said to Ross Wilson himself, that when a void is created and when he doesn't speak to us and when there is silence and disconnect between the club and us, we're going to come to conclusions that perhaps aren't right. And when Giovanni Van Bronckhorst has said things previously, I think that causes issues. Now, you know my position on that. I've been very vocal on here, but it was obvious from today, Derek, as well, that people in the room, shareholders, also felt the same thing. So it's probably, from a club point of view, an important viewpoint that they can sit and say, well, that's not factually correct, but maybe they have to be more forthcoming to the support and explain things better, and then there wouldn't be a disconnect as such.
Yeah, Michael Beale, of course, was there in attendance. Joshua, that he spoke at the AGM. What was the main takeaways from that?
Yeah, should just say as well, Derek, obviously people should not go and do this until our video's finished, but you can watch the AGM on Rangers YouTube channel. I didn't know if it was going to be made available, so if you want to kind of, I guess, I think it's an hour and a half long, so maybe you don't want to watch the whole thing, but the question and answer section at the end, maybe in particular. I'm just going to read out what Beale said, if I can find the tweet in front of me. Beale kind of continued in the vein of how he's spoken so far, which I think is pretty well, saying the right things. In particular, when he was asked about the type of football that he wants to play, I've not got it in front of me, but it is somewhere. I'll just summarise. Similar things about taking the handbrake off. Made an interesting comment about not adapting to anyone effectively, making teams adapt to Rangers, and that's, to go off from the kind of AGM topic for a second, that is quite contrasting to Giovanni Van Bronckhorst's footballing ideas. I don't think that's, both managers will want to win. Managers have different ideas of how they want to win. And Beale quite defiant about making teams adjust to Rangers playing like the big team. All the things he said previously, but outlining his vision of how he makes Rangers into a winning team. So all the talking he's done means nothing if Rangers don't go and win these games before the Old Firm. But yeah. I think if he came in with an ambition to build confidence a little bit amongst the playing squad and uplift what has been a pretty dismal mood for a few months, then he's done as much as he can to achieve that. And naturally, you'd expect there, the welcome was quite warm for him. He was certainly the one who got most applause when his name was read out at the start and when he went and did that small Q&A section.
Yeah, absolutely.
He also said, sorry, Derek, just to just a wee bit more on what Joshua was saying there, because I realise that Joshua can't find the bits on it, but he also said that training was very good. They'd done 6 sessions together. And his immediate intake from it all was that lots of energy, lots of enthusiasm, getting a good response back from the players. So he spoke a lot about his identity, wanting to get his identity onto the pitch as quickly as possible, wants to excite the fans, wants the fans to, not only the fans, but wants the players to be excited and buy into it, so that when we as fans go to the ground, we can be excited by what he's seeing. He also very classily paid tribute to Giovanni Van Bronckhorst. He said, and I quote, "A man of true class, did an exceptional job the last year, and felt very sorry for him, the circumstances and the way it went." Paid tribute also a wee bit to Steven Gerrard for bringing him in, but he didn't make. He said, and I quote, "No bold statements from me, no big ideas. I simply just want to get the team playing well, play attacking football, excite the fans, and all concentration is on Hibs." So he speaks really well, and I spoke about this maybe before with you, Derek, that he is ready to be Rangers manager. He says all the right things. He knows, and he was very warmly received, I think, by the shareholders today. So that was very positive, and he certainly speaks. He speaks very well. He knows the right things to say. It's all about getting onto the pitch now.
Yeah. Was there any, Joshua, the question coming in here from Bob, was anything mentioned about the Fox investment offer or any investment posed to the board at all? Stevie,
someone stood up and asked that question, and John Bennett's response, not about the Fox investment offer, but I think just in general, the potential of new investment. And Bennett gave probably the shortest answer of afternoon when he said, as long as, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Stevie, but as long as some motions are passed today, then yes.
So basically, the question was, the gentleman explained his background slightly and said, is there room for external investment and is the club welcoming that? Very short answer, as Joshua said, was yes, and it depends on resolutions passing today. Now, I believe that is to do with Resolution 8 passing, which obviously has hit the headlines because Dave King spoke about it, etc.
Yeah.
That'll basically allow the club to ad hoc and create new shares to basically give to outside external interests. So, and bear in mind, folks, I'm not Derek. I'm just a normal fan. So me knowing the ins and outs of this are a bit tricky, but that's the best explanation I can give it. If Resolution 8 gets passed, then we will be able to get new external investors. And incidentally, that gentleman was down at the stage speaking to the board afterwards and basically saying, I have money to invest in this football club. Can we do it? So I was doing my best to log in as much as I could. But, that was interesting. But there was nothing mentioned about Fox investment in anywhere. That name wasn't brought up at all.
Yeah, okay. Josh has to dive off shortly, but I just wanted to touch on what Stevie mentioned previously, Josh. This was news that broke late last night. Rangers have proposed an Ibrox seating extension after plans were signed off to improve disabled facilities at the stadium. The new plans will see a total of 162 accessible spaces within the ground. As a result, stand seating will be reduced by 1,073. The club proposed to add extra rows of seating in both the Copeland and Broomloan stands, which would allow for 1,800 new seats. Funding would be required for the proposal to be passed. That was discussed at the AGM, wasn't it, Joshua? And what did you make of it?
Yeah, well, this has been something that I think the club have needed to do for a while. They started this was the first presentation, and again, you can watch that if you want to watch the AGM in full. It would be 162 new accessible seats and would be added there. That would see just over 1,000 seats lost, but again, with that additional proposed extensions to Ibrox along the Broomloan and the Copeland. I think it was the front of the upper tier that would add an extra 1,800, but funding would be needed for that. There was a question put to Andrew Dixon. I think it was Andrew Dixon towards the end about when work is proposed to start for that, and he said there's still work to be done, but the hopeful time frame for that is the summer of 2023. So again, that's something that I think has come up from memory the last couple of AGMs, and has been something that I think the club have needed to do. If they're able to, as we say, add those extra seats, then it would mean that Ibrox would get an extra, just over 700 seats, as well as the 162 accessible seats for those who need it. But as you mentioned there, the funding is needed for that. But you'd imagine that is something that would happen. They split the video into two segments to firstly show the work that needed to be done for the accessible seats, and then the work that needed to be done if the funding is available to add on those 1,800 seats as mentioned.
Yeah, right. Joshua, you're heading off, but thanks very much for your input. I'll keep Stevie just for the next few minutes. Stevie, what the disabled access is something that a lot of supporters have been calling for some time now. I have seen some gripes on social media about people maybe concerned about having to move seats as a result. What's your overall view of the proposals and what was mentioned today?
Well, I'll try and give what I would take as being a simplistic view on it, Derek, of what to try and explain to people who might be thinking, how does it all work? So if you're looking at the back rows of the Broomloan and the Copeland and the Sandy Jardine, basically talking about maybe taking 3 rows away from each of those 3 stands. And then you would make platforms where accessible access is available. That would be covered, potentially very good views, and then they would put lifts in each of the sections of the stand so that the people could get easy access to those raised platforms. So that should hopefully give an explanation. But in turn, because that the 3 rows are now there, it gives the club a possibility that they can extend the front of the Copeland front and the Broomloan rear if that makes sense.
Got you. Yeah,
So
yeah,
they
yeah,
can
yeah.
add on to it, so it would slightly hang down. So the seats then that we're losing from the back of the three stands could then become added on the front of the Copeland rear and the Broomloan rear. So I hope that kind of explains it in layman's terms of what I took from it. You know, we'll end up with, again, a capacity increase of 700 seats. So it's something that's in the making. It should start, as Joshua says, next summer. But
Yeah,
it's very, very impressive, and it's very forward thinking, Derek, of the club, and it's facilities that is really needed. The current facilities and the enclosure, you know, it's terrible for weather. People can't see because officers will stand in the way and stuff as they need to police and stewards
yeah,
and things. So, you know, this is about giving access, the best possible access that we can. And I feel that the presentation was I'm not going to sit and it was something that I would be proud of as a
yeah,
club if we were making those strides and making those adjustments. And then obviously I understand people being worried about maybe moving and things like that. I get that. There will be seat moves and people will have to move. But there's a possibility of brilliant seating being created right at the front of both those stands behind the goals and being front and central. So I would imagine that people getting removed will be offered those seats very at first. So I understand that some people might be a wee bit worried, but this is a forward-thinking move, and
yeah.
it brings the club again, brings the stadium up levels and proper access for everyone. I think it's something that, as a fan base and as a club, we can be pretty proud of.
Yeah, yeah, certainly is something I think that needed to happen. Just a couple more comments we'll get to. Bill Bam says, well, a live one for me in rainy California, Portage time. Good to have you on, Bill. I'm sure even though it's raining over there, the temperature is a touch warmer than it is over here in the UK. And James Strachan gets in touch, good friend of the show, says, hi guys, nice to see you guys on. Just woke up in the hospital in pain with my knee replacement. I'll need to go back and watch what I've missed. Wish you a speedy recovery, James. I know you've been in there for a bit of time, so hopefully you're on the mend soon. Just before we wrap up, Stevie, was there any other issues that you felt should have been put towards the board that wasn't, or was there any other big talking points that you feel deserve to be mentioned here?
Yeah, I mean we're venturing into the stage of grumpiness, though, Derek. When you ask me like what should have been mentioned, but I think the board were very lucky today to escape any questions surrounding Australia. There was absolutely nothing asked on that at all, and I thought that would be a big topic of discussion.
Yeah.
It wasn't. Further to that, there was no questions on any of the external settlements, lawsuits, etc. Again, I thought that the club were very lucky that nobody brought that up. And they were the two that I would have thought would have been the big ones that people have went with. But you get the ones that there's some obvious ones like my jersey is a big bone of contention for people. And that was explained as best we could. So that took up a lot of time. I think there was 2 or 3 questions on that. And the answer basically, you know, it was also put to them a very, very pointed question on the Champions League package and the cost of it.
Yeah.
And the answer, people aren't going to like this, but the answer was basically, well, we sold them out. The demand was there. Appreciate it's the high end, but we're trying to compete with other clubs. And they showed the graph of Champions League money about what the clubs in our group would make guaranteed from the Champions League. From memory, I don't have it in front of me, but Liverpool were at 50 million. Rangers' guaranteed income was 17.9 million.
That's right.
So, and they also said that after everything had all the deductions had been taken away, we'd only make something like £3 million more than a normal Europa League run. So that gave context to where we are and what kind of money the Champions League brings us. And to explain why that is because we had no Europe for 5 years. So our coefficient rating and income, it goes down. But the more that we play in it, and the more years, that 5 years diminishes and it goes up and up. But that basically gives you an idea. So the potential 40 million and things is not where we are. And the club went at kind of great lengths to explain that. A couple of other wee significant points in the accounts. It was confirmed Champions League, Calvin Bassey, Joe Aribo income is not in there. And at the start of the year, we have a 13.1 million in the bank, basically, and that's to fund the club throughout the years. John Bennett has made available a £10 million fund, so to speak, that the club can use in more feral times. That was the exact terminology they mean when the club don't really make a lot of money, no Champions League income. So they're talking about that being February time. So those were interesting things that I picked up. But financially, the club seemed to be in a pretty good place. They explained basically a bit about the finances in the accounts and not getting the going concern statement off of the accounts for the first time in over a decade. So they were important factors. But all in all, of the things not mentioned, the big points, Derek, were the Australia one. And obviously, I thought that somebody would have asked them to maybe explain a wee bit more about settlements and things like that. And they didn't. It was all questions that were pretty predictable.
Yeah. Okay, folks, that'll do us there. A big thanks to Stevie and Joshua, as ever. As Joshua mentioned earlier on, that AGM is on the Rangers YouTube channel. You can go and check it out for yourself. And just a reminder, folks, as well, you can see the little ticker below. We've got that Christmas offer on the website just now. £1 for 2 months worth of content. Head over to rangersreview.co.uk/subscribe for all the details. And there'll be loads on there from that AGM earlier on today. We'll be back again tomorrow to talk all things Rangers. But until then, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.